Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. This one's for the beginners and welcome to what is the best airbrush paint and what is the best mixing combo. Now I've got it in one can, guys. You've not got to worry, you've not got to stress, it's easy to come by. You can just take it straight out of the tin, put it in whatever airbrush you want, whether it's a 015, a 018 micron bottom feed, and it's this one right here. Dulux for walls and ceilings. Straight out of the can, straight in the airbrush, and you're good to go. Ignore all these airbrush paints. 2.5 litre of that, job is a good one. No, don't even try putting that through your airbrush. Just thought I'd test you, see what the comments are going to be like. Now we're going to run through some paints and what I think is the best, because I've tried a lot of paints and I've got a lot of paints. I've got even more paints in the other room. I'm going to tell you what I'd sort of recommend. It all goes on what you're painting and what surface you're painting on. Because I do a mixed bag, I'm going to run through some pictures as well that I've done recently on the channel, and I'll tell you which paint mixes and what paint brands I've used on them. So, paint brands that we've got today, we have got Artist Acrylic, out the bottle, thick. Yes, it is sprayable, but you've got to tweak your mixes with it. We'll talk about mixing in a minute. We've got golden high flow acrylics. We've got some cheap Amazon. We've got FW inks. I've got the whole range of FW inks, from the normal colours down to the pearlescents to the shimmers. I've got all of them. We've got some other cheap acrylics. We've got Wicked version 2. We've got Wicked version 1. Createx illustration, comart. I've got Solvents from base coats, solid colours, and different thinners to go with different solvents as well, because some paint brands use different thinners, and if you mix up different thinners with different paint brands, it curdles and you get an absolute nightmare. And I've gone through all these nightmares mixing different paints and what paints lay on top of each other. Some like it, some don't, and this is something you've got to sort of like test out. You'll get this along your journey. You'll drop a paint over another paint and it will react. So I've gone through all this learning curve over the years and years and years of painting with different brands of paint, and I've sort of stuck to golden when I first started out. Now, golden high flow acrylics is straight in your airbrush. Now, the old golden, which I've got here, I've got some of the old bottles, some of these bottles are like 8 years old, was really good stuff. But I swear that they have changed the formula on their golden, because it is an absolute nightmare now. If any of you are using golden, the new stuff, now I found it in the black and the transparent shading grey. Now, transparent shading grey, the old golden used to spray absolutely fine in the airbrush. I've got a new mix of golden, which is the shading grey, and I can put it in any airbrush at the minute, spray, it'll spray and do about 3 passes, and then it chokes, clogs up, then you've got to blast through, chokes, clogs up, and it stop, start, stop, start. So at the minute, golden is sort of a last resort for me, unless I'm using my old bottles of it, which is absolutely fine, a 1-to-1 mix. I think the new golden, whether the company's been brought out or changed, I don't know, but their formula now just does not work for me. It really doesn't. It's just too intermittent when you spray. So if you've got some old golden, you'll know, but if you've tried some of the new stuff and you're getting problems with it, drop your comments, tell me your thoughts. You can use their high flow medium to thin it. This will turn an opaque and it pushes it across to a transparent, and it also gives it like a flow improver as well, so it makes it flow a little bit better. But I find using distilled water or tap water with golden 1-to-1, so 1 drop of golden, 1 drop of water, works brilliant when you've got, say, me personally, the old golden, not the new bottles that I've had. Whether it was a bad batch, I don't know, but I've not sort of brought any more. So that's the golden that we've got. Now the next one is comart. Now I've had troubles with this as well, with comart. I owned 2 bottles of this. I had a bottle of black and I've got a bottle of white. And this is just gone hard to the bottom. The black did the same. After a few months in the studio, it just sort of, it's loosened off, this one is. But this comart is very, very thin, extremely thin. So it's good for doing like eraser techniques. If you're using like your synthetic papers and things, drop your air pressure down. And you've not really got to thin this. This is straight out the bottle and it is very washy and thin. So that's the only bottle of comart I've got left is a white, and I don't use this anymore. So comart was a trial for me. We've got FW inks, which I'm really raving about at the minute. I'm doing a lot of my portrait work with FW inks. I find it really nice. You can spray it out the bottle, but it's not great out the bottle, I don't think, unless you're running a bit higher pressure. Because I'm doing a lot of my portrait work at the minute and I'm really enjoying an extremely thin mix, and I'll show you the mix ratio in a minute. But FW inks I think works best running comfortable, so you get your details around 10 psi. I love running low pressure in an airbrush and having the paint really, really thin. So FW works for me best with isopropyl alcohol. This is a 99.9 isopropyl. I'll leave a link in the description to this one. It's cheap to buy. And I'm mixing FW inks like 2 drops of ink to 2 drops of water, and then mix say 10 to 15 drops to 20 drops of isopropyl in that, so it's really thin. Mix it up. I find the water in first, mix it with the water, and then drop the ISO in it, and then mix that up nice, and it just sprays really well. And I've got a load of bottles pre-mixed, and I've got my mixing ratios on these little bottles of the different paints. So FW for me at the minute is, I'm loving it. It works really well. And I had FW inks years ago and never used it. It was all on the shelf, just never used it. Got brought a load and I was always on golden. And it's only recently I've just picked up the FW inks for working on portraits and doing miniatures and things like that, and it just works great. Now we're going to move on to Createx illustration. You can't go wrong, guys, you really can't. Createx illustration works brilliant, especially the transparent. I've got 2 bottles of transparent Payne's Grey, and it sprays brilliant. It really does. Cannot fault Createx illustration. If you want to dilute this, distilled water, go 1:1 on the mix, and you will have no issues with this paint. It just comes out the airbrush and atomizes perfectly. You can manipulate this paint as well. You can do, if you want to do erasing techniques, if you want to go into the realistic work, illustration all day long. Just get yourself a set of the illustration if you want to go down that route. Absolutely brilliant. You can use your illustration for automotive. I have. You can use FW for automotive. I have. Golden, yep. Cheap acrylics, yes. Because you are clear coating over your artwork. So you're giving that paint the UV protection if you use a decent clear coat. If you use cheap clear coats over sort of your cheaper brands of acrylic, that sun's going to beat down on that and that UV is going to kill it. That's where you'd move on to your sort of better quality airbrush paints. I'd go, if you're using cheap clears, then I'd use Wicked, because Wicked's got a better, it's just a better pigment in the Wicked. It's a bit stronger than the illustration, but you can use them. But I'd recommend you use a decent clear anyway. If you're doing airbrush artwork where you're spending 4 to 5 hours on a piece of artwork on the side of a gas tank, you're not going to go and chuck a medium solid, cheap, nasty clear coat over it to cut corners. You don't. You either drop a HS or a UHS clear coat over the top. Spend the money on the products, because that is going to make your artwork last, and the customer will have no dramas with their bite tank or car bonnet that you're spraying, because you know you've put a quality clear coat on. So just put that into the price and it will save your artwork along the lines. So we've got that, we've got illustration, Wicked version 2, which is this one here. Now, I've got some of the old Wicked and I used it probably twice, and I've had it sitting on the shelf for about 9 years, because at the time I was using the 4011 or whatever reducer it was, and I was tending to get through the reducer really quick, and it was like £7-8 for a bottle of reducer. You've then got to send off for it, you're waiting 2 or 3 days in the post for it to turn up, and it's time consuming, it's not efficient unless you've got big quantities of the 4011 sitting on your shelf, which I didn't at the time. So I put Wicked down and never used it again. But it is a very nice paint. Now the version 2, which is the newer one, I think it's brilliant. It's better than the first one because I mix it with that isopropyl and it mixes brilliant. I'll show you some of the portraits in a minute that I've done with that. So really like the Wicked mixed with the iso, just straight isopropyl with it, mix it right up and it just sprays perfect, absolutely perfect at low pressure. Real small needle nozzle setup, and they're the ones where I've been getting down on them miniature credit card portraits with that paint, and you have no dramas. So brilliant paint, guys. So they're the ones that I'd sort of recommend. When it comes to thinning paints, golden, I'd use water, so I always have a bottle of water in the studio. I do use golden still. It's like if I need some of the colours, I know I've got a backup of golden of the old stuff that I can use, so I use with water. You can get flow improvers like the Winsor Newton one here. Now, some of these flow improvers work okay in acrylics and sometimes they don't. It's just a test, guys. I mean, I don't know all the mixing complete ratios, like that works well with that. I know that does work. It does work with golden, okay, and it does work with some of these cheaper ones. Some of the ones you're getting off Amazon like these, you get packs like these, Segudo or whatever it's called, and they say airbrush paint and it's cheap, and when you're a beginner and you're looking at paint, you go on Amazon and you see these multi-packs of 40 paints with all these vibrant colours, and you look at the description and it says spray straight out the bottle and blah de blah de blah. It's garbage. It is absolute garbage. It really is. For practicing with, if you're just doffing it over some paper and just giving it a little squirt and practice, yes, but it's frustrating. I think the best way to go is go with a brand, a decent brand that, yes, you've still got to thin it. Yes, it still can be an absolute ball ache. Like Golden is a brand that's been going for years, and at the minute, for me, it's an absolute ball ache. FW, no dramas. Createx illustration, Wicked, no dramas. You can just give it a little tweak, little mix up, and you're good to go. When it comes to solvents, it's like solvents are a dream. They really are. When it comes to base coats, we've got cans of base coats. I've got all different colours of base coats and things. Solvents are probably, I'd say, the best, and that's why I'm liking isopropyl alcohol mixes, because our isopropyl alcohol is, water is a lot denser than isopropyl alcohol. So when you mix your iso with your paint, you will see the difference when you mix it. The paint just mixes up, and the flow you get with it is brilliant, guys. It really is. And it's the same across the board with solvents. When you're using, say, whites and blacks, if you use whites in airbrush acrylics, they are an absolute nightmare to spray. You've got to crank your airbrush right up to get the paint out, or if you try and thin it to run low pressure with a white, it just washes it out and you don't get your opaque, you don't get the build up. The best one is solvent based paint, like your car paint, and you mix that with a 2K thinner, so you can get medium, fast and slow thinners. I usually go for fast thinners when I'm using solvents on pieces of artwork, because it dries out the paint quicker, it evaporates out quicker. If you use a medium, it will leave the paint wetter, and if you use a slow, you've got a lot more drying time with the paint. But solvent white in base coat all day long, that's my go-to. If I need some white, I'll just crack open a can of the white solvent, mix a drop. You can thin it to what you want and it doesn't lose that opacity in the paint. It's just brilliant, really good. So you've got the solvents you can go down. Now if you go specialist paints, custom paints, nice paint, can't knock it, they do some really nice stuff. Link in the description to custom paints. I've got quite a few of their brands, their colours, metallic blacks, candies. I've got a whole range of the candy stuff. We're just doing some candies on the Batwing and saddlebags on the channel. Now, this is a brand that uses their own thinner. Now, if you look at the custom paints, buy their D thinner, because you cannot put 2K normal thinner with their paint. It doesn't like it. It really doesn't, and you will get issues, as I did when I first tried this paint. Didn't realise you had to use the D thinner, took 2K thinners in it, did a massive piece of artwork, and the candy just blew out and just went from red to like a brown in a matter of a month on a car bonnet. It just washed out bad, really bad. So mix it with their thinners, and if you are using their brand of paint and you're working up through your layers, go for your 2K high builds and things like that, but then when it comes to the base coat, use their base coat for the next layer, use their other coats for the next layers, and then a standard 2K clear coat. Actually, you're going to get issues and you'll get some reactions, you'll get bleed throughs, you'll get all sorts of issues. So you've got to be careful when you use different brands, especially when it's like the car stuff. Normal car stuff's usually like 2K hardener, your 2K I build primers, usually good to go with solvent on top of solvent like that. You can go solvents over the top of base coat, over the top of water-based acrylics. You can do that because they do that in the car industry. In the car industry, when it comes to paint, they have a 2K primer, and now what they're doing is to save the environment, which to me sounds a bit stupid. You go solvent with your primer, and then to save the environment, they give you a water-based base coat which sits here, and then you put in solvent over it again to clear coat it up. So it's like, okay. Putting water-based paints down, I think you get a nicer finish, a water-based base coat on a car, when you drop a clear coat over the top. I think it pops a different finish, because when you put a solvent down and then you drop a solvent on top, that solvent hits that solvent, and you can get like a sort of like a dull off on the paint, because you're dropping a solvent, it's livening that up. But when you've got a water base, that solvent's got nothing to liven up because it's water based and cured down and gone off. So there's loads of different methods and ways you can put paints down. But for me, the best airbrush paint at the minute, for me, what I'd recommend for you guys, Createx illustration, FW inks, Wicked, Golden third, and then your cheap stuff. If you're using cheap stuff, we've got some here, we've got Crafter's Choice, and I've recommended it on the channel, and it is all right, but you've got to thin it right. You've got to thin this with water. So a lot of your water-based acrylics are water. When it comes to the Wicked version 1, they don't like water. You put water in it, it doesn't like it. You've got to use their reducer, which is either the 4011, I think, or 4010, I don't know, I'm not clued up on that. But it's one of them. Golden, mix it with water. FW inks, do it my mix. If you want to get some really nice flow, a few drops of water, isopropanol all day long with that stuff, it just performs really well. So we'll move over to some of the pictures and I'll talk you through what paint and what mix. Right, a little talk through on paint mixes, what I've used and what I've achieved with these paints, and the ones that I would recommend for you guys, and what I'd say is the best. Well, that works the best for me. It might not work the best for you. You might pick one of these brands up that I recommend and go, oh my God, why did I buy that? Wow. Throw it in the garbage. But I know it works for me. So paints on this that I've used and mixing ratios. That was done with the new Wicked version 2, straight isopropanol, and works an absolute treat. That was nice to paint. No dramas with flowing, can run the brush down, 10 psi, it will sit there at 10 psi all day long with that mix and flow. And that's what you want with a brush. You want to be able to pick it up, put that mix of paint in, and you've not got none of this stop, start, move to the side, blast it through, blast it through. It's annoying. You don't want to get annoyed while you're doing this. You really don't, because you're trying to concentrate. So you want to paint that works. So Wicked version 2, isopropanol, thumbs up. Moving to that one, the Eagle, that was done with FW Inks water isopropanol mix. Works an absolute dream. So that one was that. David Bowie, small portrait. As you can see, that's A3, and we're coming right down on details on the David Bowie one. That was FW Inks again. Same mix, works a dream. Working to this one was Wicked Black, mixed in with the isoprop. Lovely, and then dropped a little bit of FW Inks Black, mixed with water and isopropanol. Job done, nice. This one here was FW Inks Sepia mixed with water and isopropanol. Absolutely ran lovely on that, and you just build the layers up. Because you're using an opaque, when you thin that mix down to a real thin consistency, you just layer it up like you're using a transparent, and it just gets darker, darker and darker. And that's how I'm working these portraits at the minute. That's what my comfortable way of working is, that thinned out opaque and just build it up. You get nice finishes like that. So that's FW. This one was, I'm sure this one's Createx Illustration Payne's Grey. Works absolutely brilliant. Createx Illustration Payne's Grey is a transparent, and if you want to dilute that, I'd just go 1 to 1. 1 drop of paint to 1 drop of tap water or distilled water, and that stuff flows brilliantly. It really does. And I think that was FW Inks as well, mixed in with that. There's a few different brands, but they're all thinned down to that real thin consistency where you can run 10 psi down to 5 psi, and it just atomizes perfect because it's just flowing. You'll find that when you mix isopropanol, because isopropanol, the body of it, the denseness of isopropanol alcohol is a lot, water is denser than that. So when you mix that in your paint, it makes that paint just, you can see it when you've mixed it in your pot and you do that, it's just very, very, there's no sort of, it's weird to describe, it's very, I can't think of the word, but you'll see it when you mix to the side of your pot, how it runs down, it glides, it's really, really silky smooth in the mix. Other than when you mix it with water and you do that, it sort of swishes and then slowly comes down the pot. Put isopropanol in it, it just makes it really, really silky. Same with these FW Inks. We've used FW Inks Payne's Grey with the water and ISO on the miniatures, and it just sprays perfect. The brushes that I've been using for these as well, because it goes down to this sort of brush as well. A lot of it on the miniatures and on this stuff is Infinity Geraldes 02 running low pressure with the Evo 2024 trigger top in it. Now that is the best trigger top to stick in the Geraldes. If you've got a Geraldes with the little, I call it the rhino horn at the front, it is annoying. I can paint with it because I sit to the back of the trigger on an H&S anyway, so the little lip at the front doesn't bother me. But if you want comfort, drop the 2024 Evo trigger in the Geraldes and watch that brush and the response come alive with that new trigger in. It's a lot better, it really is. So I found the Geraldes working with this, brilliant brush, because it just flows. It's a top cup, goes straight down and out the front of the brush, flows really nice. That and the Micron, custom Micron Takumi works an absolute dream. Side feed, gravity fed into the brush and out the front on a 018. Really nice. Low pressure with a Micron running the real thin paints just turns it into a different brush. You'll notice this if you're used to running 25 psi with your cheap Amazon paints or whatever, you've got a big bulk load of paint and you're like having to crank the pressure up to 30 psi and you're pulling back halfway on the trigger to get the paint out the front of the brush. It's like, I couldn't paint like that. I really couldn't paint like that. It's just be annoying because you've not got the control there in that trigger. You're having to go halfway back before you get your paint out the front of the brush. If you want to see how a proper airbrush performs, drop your pressure down to 10, thin your paint right out to a real nice mix like I've just showed you for these, and then try your trigger, and then you will see how good your airbrush is on the response. When you drop your pressure, thin your paint right down. You can get airbrushes, I can get the Geraldes to literally just seems like you're pressing down, because you get a little bit of, when you press down on that brush, a lot of airbrushes, it just slightly, as you press down, it just releases the needle from the nozzle at the tip of the front, just gives it that tiny bit of release. Normally it wouldn't release paint, but when you've got a real thin mix and you go slightly down and you're ready to move back, that paint's there. And that's how I like the on point, so you know exactly where you're going to touch and you can get a tiniest amount of paint coming out. And that's how you like to paint when you're, that's how you want your brush and your paint to perform when you're doing details on something that the size of a credit card, guys, on eyes and things like that, and coming down to this size. Because you ain't going to get that style of detail running at 25 psi with a cheap crappy paint. It's just, you will not achieve it. Things like that at 25 psi with a thick bodied acrylic, it just won't happen. You've really got to start dialing your paints in when you come into here. You can, the bigger you go, you can sort of sit back a bit and just slightly up the pressure a bit, because you've got a bigger image, your image is bigger. So that's my brands that I would recommend, guys, is Createx Illustration, definitely. Wicked version 2, FW Inks, Golden High Flow is my backup, but it is a good paint. I've had it for 14 years, 15 years, been permanently using it. I've just had a bad batch, I think, with my black and my shading grey, which is a transparent, and you could put Createx Illustration transparent, and you could put my golden shading grey transparent, 2 brand new bottles out the bottle, and the Createx will absolutely annihilate it, and you will be going stop start stop start with the transparent shading grey, and it's like, oh, turn the pressure up. I might have to go and get a big size primer gun just to put it in to be able to spray it. So sometimes it's like that. So it's your choice, guys. They're my recommendations. You've seen the work that I've done with it and what I can achieve with it. If you are using solvents, if you're using any paints, people always say, we never see you wearing a respirator. When I'm usually on camera, on sort of spraying in here, I've got roof ventilation here above. So when I put the extractor on, it draws air in this way and goes out that way, and it comes in from the door as well. So if you see me on the time lapse, I can just flick the extraction on. You're not hearing it, you're just hearing music going on the video, and I'll do like a cycle. If I'm painting for an hour, I'll then just cycle, or I'll open the double doors that are behind the camera now and let fresh air in. If you're using solvents, respirator, guys, stick a respirator on. If you've not got good ventilation, when you're using water-based acrylics, stick something on just to cover up. But if you've got good ventilation or you've got an extractor running, you're good to go, because you're not, when you're running low PSI and stuff like this, you're not creating a lot of sort of overspray coming back at you. And if you've got an extractor running, it's drawing clean air in as you're painting. So just be careful with that. Anything else to cover? I think I've covered it all. If you're doing automotive, just watch what you're putting down. When it comes to overlaying paints, I know what goes over what. Your FW inks will sit with golden either way over the top as long as they're dry. Any of them ones will sit on top of each other. You've not no sort of dramas as long as you let the paints dry off. If you're hitting solvents over your airbrush acrylics, make sure your airbrush acrylics have gone off. Make sure they're dried out completely. Make sure, because they're water-based and they've got a water-based sort of carrier, you're mixing it with water and you're spraying it. So make sure it's really dried and gone off because you're putting a solvent over the top. It can be done. I do it. I've done it on the two saddlebags that we've been doing. I've been using solvent, water-based, FW inks, Wicked, a multi-layer of different paints, and they all sit nicely as long as you let them cure down, go off before you start smashing on another colour. And always, this sort of stuff you can paint quick. I can paint this stuff all day long quick because it's paper, and it's, if you're working on canvas, if you're working on t-shirts, paper that's absorbed, it's quick for me. It's like you can blast it on, you're not getting any bleed through. When you come across to automotive, just start thinking of your pressures and your paint mixes because you are on a smoother surface. So the minute you're hitting something with 25 psi on a smooth surface, it's going to blow the paint everywhere. So you've got to start thinking about your paint mixes and your pressures when you come to automotive. And I'm finding that out now, painting this stuff, I've got to start changing up, slowing down. Even though I hate painting slow, I just like to smash stuff out, get it done. But automotive, it does slow you down. You've got to take your time, check your pressures and your paints. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget, if you are new to the channel, click that subscribe, press that notification, and I will see you in the next one, which is going to be the bat wing. We're going to go through the artwork on the bat wing and finish that one off, and then we can move on to clear coating. So if you wanted to see some clear coating stuff, I can take you through a decent clear coat because I was on about clear coats. You want something decent that's going over your artwork, I've got just the one for you guys, which will be in the video when we get the artwork done on the bat wing. So thanks again. See you in the next one.